Okay guys, here we are in DCS world, as always, and we're leading a 4-ship of Republic of China Air Force aircraft with a section of 2 F-16s and a section of 2 Mirage 2000s as we fly out to intercept a flight of People's Liberation Army Air Force aircraft as they approach the ADIZ, or Air Defense Identification Zone, out here in the Strait of Taiwan. Now, we're out here today to discuss a rather interesting but also rather nerve-wracking and potentially scary topic, and that is why, and the nefarious reason behind why, the People's Liberation Army Air Force and People's Liberation Army Navy aircraft have increased their sortie rates around Taiwan and into the ADIZ in the Strait of Taiwan in the recent months. This will also dovetail nicely with some of the struggles that the United States military is also facing with their own inventory of military aircraft. And it's a very interesting topic. Of course, I'm making this commentary live as I fly through this, so please bear with me through any stumbles over any words and whatnot. So let's go ahead and get into formation with this flight of H6s before we start off with discussing this actual topic. Looks like they're about 8 nautical miles in front of us. So, as I'm sure you guys all know, the People's Liberation Army Air Force and PLAN, the People's Liberation Army Navy, have increased their sortie rate into the ADIZ around Taiwan by a lot in the recent months, as starting about mid-2021. And there's a few reasons for this. I don't really personally think that it is an omen that a wider war in Asia is about to start, but it's definitely incredibly dangerous, and it's something to definitely watch out for in the future here. But, you know, a lot of people throw out lots of different reasons for why this is happening. Most of it comes down to gathering intelligence or showing military strength and military pride on the part of the Communist Chinese and trying to dominate, show air power dominance over that of the Republic of China Air Force, things of that nature. But in reality, underneath, there's an underlying long-term strategy behind the PLAAF and the PLAN's sortie rates over Taiwan, and it coincides perfectly with the upgrading of the Republic of China Air Force's F-16s to the F-16V standard. So let's go ahead and try to sync up with these guys here. Looks like they're about 20,000 feet. Looks like they're flying right between the 2 layers of clouds. Looks like we've got a couple aircraft here, an H-6 flanked by a couple flankers. And we'll go ahead and pull up with them, and we will assess their weapons carriage, see if they're armed or not. We're gonna, of course, leave our external lights on. Our master arm switch is set to safe, so that way we don't accidentally start a international incident or potentially even World War III here. And hopefully we can intercept these guys and kind of start to push them away from Taiwanese territorial waters and airspace. Now keep in mind, guys, that an Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ, is not necessarily the border, and it's in most cases not the border of, say, national airspace or territorial waters. It's in fact usually farther out. It's a place for interceptors, such as ourselves today, to go out and see incoming aircraft before they get to that red line that is territorial airspace and territorial waters, where a international incident or a war could start. So that way we can identify them and hopefully ward them away from Taiwanese airspace before they get to the point where, oh my gosh, if we have to shoot them down, or if they cross over that line, now we're going to get into a World War III kind of situation. So, as we stated earlier, the purpose behind the Chinese making these rather provocative moves is nothing new in reality. The air war, we'll call it, over the Strait of Taiwan has been happening since the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949, when the nationalists were forced to flee to the island of Formosa. Formosa, Taiwan, Republic of China, they're all more or less interchangeable names for the island that is Taiwan/Formosa. Since then, the air war over the Strait of Taiwan has gotten hot and it's gotten cold. In the 1950s, there was very hot action over the Strait of Taiwan, with Republic of China Air Force F-86s and F-100s going toe-to-toe against Chinese-built MiG-19s, MiG-21s, and MiG-15s, MiG-17s, things of that nature. And it was where air-to-air missiles, specifically the AIM-9 Sidewinder, first saw its first combat use. So we'll go ahead and slow up here as we pull up to these PLAAF aircraft from the rear aspect, making sure to be as non-threatening as possible. We can see that the H-6, which is a Chinese-built Tu-16 Badger, is very smoky with its older engines, whereas our two J-11s here are not nearly as smoky. So we can see that these J-11s are quite interesting. They have an aggressor camouflage paint scheme painted on them, so they're probably on some sort of a temporary duty assignment from the far western deserts of China, where they do all of their testing and evaluation. Think of the deserts of western China being very similar to the deserts of the western United States in terms of its military value of the NTTR, the Nevada Test and Training Range, Area 51, China Lake, things like that. The Chinese have that too in the western deserts. As we pull up to this H-6, we're happy to see that the H-6 is unarmed. There are no anti-ship missiles, no cruise missiles hanging off of it, and we can see he's an H-6D. An earlier maritime patrol variant, anti-shipping variant of the H-6, that still retains its free-fall bombing capabilities, which we can't see inside of his bomb bay, and we don't want to slide underneath him to check, but it is a good bet that he is in fact unarmed, whereas our J-11s here are definitely armed with archers and Alamos, so we want to be very careful with them. And we've got our external lights on, and of course the Chinese here do not have their external lights on, so, being more on the provocative side. So, back to our original, idea of this video is, why are the Chinese doing this? Why have their sortie rates increased? Why have their flights around Taiwan increased? And why does that coincide with the upgrading of F-16s to F-16Vs and kind of more or less the end of the Trump administration and the diplomacy efforts and military assistance efforts with the Republic of China? That is that, most people will say that this is an intelligence gathering and, kind of thumping our chest kind of situation from the communist Chinese. However, the real truth is a little bit more interesting and a little bit more cynical. The Chinese basically have gathered all the intelligence they can possibly gather about the Republic of China Air Force. The Republic of China Air Force, of course, operates from austere fields, road bases, caves and mountains, things like that, in order to prevent their total destruction upon the invasion of the Republic of China by the Communist Chinese. There are different intelligence things such as the pilot training, response times, interception response times, things of that nature that are in fact very relevant to the Communist Chinese, and they want to gather those things. But the more nefarious purpose of this increase in sortie rates is a hidden war of attrition. Now, this isn't a war of attrition in terms of firing missiles at each other and shooting down aircraft and attriting the enemy over time that way, but more of a slower, more methodical, and long-term war of attrition, in which the Communist Chinese know that they can outproduce and outprocure the Republic of China Air Force in the long term. The Communist Chinese have secured diplomatic channels in order to prevent the acquisition of fighter aircraft and helicopters by the Republic of China Air Force for a number of decades now, leading back all the way to the opening of Communist China in 1973 by Richard M. Nixon. So, of course, the Republic of China Air Force took delivery of aircraft like the F-16As and their Mirage 2000s in the mid to late 1980s and early 1990s. Of course, F-16As only have a service life of about 8,000 flying hours. This, of course, with the MLU extension program, has brought that up to about 12,000 flying hours, but that's still a finite number. An F-16 is only going to be able to fly so many sorties, and it's only going to be able to fly so many hours in the air before it's simply unrepairable and can't be upgraded any longer. The Chinese, of course, know this, and so therefore, these increase in sortie rates is to make the Republic of China Air Force fly more hours, fly longer hours to intercept and identify these flights of People's Liberation Army aircraft. So, as a result, the Communist Chinese are attriting the Republic of China Air Force in a more natural way, in a more natural progression, forcing the ROCAF to spend more flight hours on training, more flight hours on these interception flights, and just in general, the more an aircraft flies, the more chance there is for having some sort of a mishap, a crash, damage to the aircraft on landing, damage on takeoff, some sort of pilot error that's going to cause the total loss of an airframe, all of that kind of stuff. And it's incredibly important for the Communist Chinese to degrade the Republic of China Air Force as much as possible over time. Any cross-strait invasion of Taiwan is going to require that the People's Liberation Army Air Force gain air superiority immediately. The Communist Chinese don't have a ton of experience with amphibious landings on enemy-held territory. It will be an incredibly complex, incredibly expensive, and incredibly bloody campaign to take Taiwan away from the Chinese nationalists. This is just a simple fact, and having air superiority is absolutely key. Having F-16s, Mirages, and FC-1Ks launching and firing anti-ship cruise missiles, shooting down H-6 bombers, shooting down J-11s, things of that nature, is going to make that operation much more difficult and much more costly. So, as a result of that, the Chinese know that the best way to assure air superiority in the event of the balloon going up and the actual invasion of Taiwan is to ensure that the Republic of China Air Force is in as low of a state of readiness as absolutely possible. And this coincides with the upgrading of the F-16 to the F-16V standard and the procurement of new F-16s as a result. If we can get those pilots to fly a whole bunch of sorties in a whole bunch of hours really quickly, when maybe they're not used to these new types of upgraded F-16s, maybe we can get a couple to crash. Maybe we can put more stress on their airframes. Those initial batch of F-16Vs are just upgraded F-16As. Let's put as much stress on those airframes as possible and degrade them as much as possible in case that Xi Jinping decides to actually invade Taiwan, as they've been doing a ton of saber rattling lately. It's also, of course, that Communist China likes to throw a fit whenever the military of Taiwan receives any kinds of upgrades or additional procurements of equipment. So it's twofold. It's both diplomatic, showing their displeasure with the Republic of China Air Force procuring and upgrading their aircraft, but also to naturally attrite those aircraft and give an edge to the People's Liberation Army Air Force, because they know in the long run they're going to be able to produce more aircraft and keep up with that natural attrition of those aircraft far easier than the the Republic of China Air Force. And another kind of side effect of this is the Chinese, off to our left here, the Communist Chinese, they have to be perfect. They can do whatever they want on these intercepts. They can fly into us, they can be provocative, they can try and cut us off, they can do any of these kinds of things, whereas we, as the Republic of China Air Force F-16 intercepting these guys in the ADIZ, we have to be perfect. We can't allow ourselves to be caught up, get frustrated, get angry with these guys, potentially shoot one down, or even allow ourselves to cut one of them off, because anything that we do is going to be seen as an act of war, and they're going to be trying to provoke us into any kind of response to force us into a war to give them an excuse to invade Taiwan. This is the same kind of tactics and situations that we see from Russian aircraft in around Syria or the Black Sea, because there is no reason for the Russian pilots to conduct themselves in as professional of a manner as possible. They are always going to be seen as more or less quote-unquote the bad guys on the international stage, so why not go ahead and mess with the Western pilots who have to conduct themselves absolutely perfectly. So this is a very interesting topic that I could talk about all day, but we'll go ahead and end the video here. And let me know in the comment section what you guys think of this video and what you think of this topic, because it is very, very interesting to me. And there really is an air war going on in Asia, and has been since the early 1950s, in which the Communist Chinese are trying to degrade and attrite the Republic of China Air Force as much as possible. So if you like this video, like the discussion, give us a like and a subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. I am very surprised the DCS World AI played this nicely for this whole time. That was very, very cool. And that aggressor skin on the J11 is pretty darn cool. Alrighty guys, well, we'll see you in the next one, and fly safe out there and stay healthy. Alrighty, see you later guys.